The name Columbine undoubtedly causes a reaction, especially with those in education. Today marks the 24th anniversary of the Columbine High School tragedy, an event that changed our schools forever and thrust the need for school security firmly in the spotlight. In this interview, former Columbine principal Frank DeAngelis talks about what happened that day, what went wrong, and what lessons have since been learned. We created Campus Contingency because we've had enough of tragedies like this and we want to do something about it. Our goal is to bring national attention and, more importantly, action to this disturbing trend while providing you with the information, training, support, and funding to ensure a safe learning environment for both students and educators. Through actions, advocacy, and lobbying, along with other content on our website and in our newsletters, we commit to helping make America's schools the safest spaces in the nation. And now, Frank DeAngelis, former principal of Columbine High School.
So I was on the Safe and Sound website, and that's actually how I was introduced to you.
Okay.
And so I wanted to ask you a little bit more about why you joined that organization and what it means to you and what you hope to accomplish through it.
Well, Michelle Gay and I met. It was she came to Colorado and we did something called the Columbine briefing. And so I was introduced to her and I was sitting next to her and she was nervous as she was going to get ready to speak. And there was, I just gave her a lot of support, this instant connection, and we became friends. And this had to be probably right during probably 2013, I'm thinking, because Sandy Hook happened on December 14th of 2012. And so I think it was the summer. So that would have been 2013. And there was this instant connection. We remained friends. And then when she decided, along with Alyssa Parker, to start the Alyssa lost her daughter, Emily. And then, of course, Michelle lost Joey or Josephine. We stayed in contact and she started Safe and Sound. And she asked if I wanted to be a part of it. And I just looked at everything she was doing and what they were doing and that commitment. And so she asked me if I'd be part of it and become part of the Speaking Bureau. And that friendship has continued to grow.
Because you started at Columbine as the principal, what, in like 1996?
Correct.
Okay. So you started there in 1996. So you'd been there a few years already. And from everything I've seen, you were a very involved principal. Everybody knew you. You knew everybody. You know, you're one of those principals who's out there in the hallways, you know, talking to, high five, and, you know, all of that, which is an amazing principal to have if you're a student or a teacher or anything. But I specifically remember, I said, you know, the incident at Columbine was kind of like a 9/11 if you were anywhere in the field of education. And at the time, I was a reporter for a newspaper in Birmingham, in Alabama, and covered a school system that was included with the city. They had their own school system. And I was actually in the superintendent's office that day. And we were just discussing some other things that were going on in the school system at the time. And then that came on breaking with the news. And I remember somebody coming in telling him to turn on the TV. And we both sat there and watched it, you know, in shock, like with everybody else. And he said to me, he said, "This changes everything." And he was so right. And that was really powerful to me. And I still remember that to this day, and just how right he was too. And I don't think people fathomed what a shift there would be in just the perception of what could happen, you know, because things had happened before, but nothing to that scale. And again, it was in like a suburban district, you know, and to that point, I don't think people had really even thought that something like that could happen. It can't happen here.
Well,
And so, yeah.
you would have
But
told me at Columbine could have happened at Columbine, I would have said no way, because
exactly.
I had been there 20 years prior.
Okay.
I taught history and I was an assistant football head baseball coach.
Okay.
And so I was basically, and it's funny that you should say, I got along with my kids, and I had a tough decision to make because I had one of my mentors say, have you ever thought of becoming a principal? And I said, why do I want to become one of them? Because I was afraid. The thing I loved about education was the kids.
Yes.
But a dear friend of mine came and she said, Frank, your position is changing and you don't have to change as a person. And if you love being with your kids, you're going to find a way. And now you can influence over 2,000 kids instead of 150.
Yeah.
So I did that. And one of the top things, I was a high school principal. I loved cafeteria duty because I got to be with my kids, and I loved being in the hallways. And I think the best compliment I received when I retired is when the teachers came up to me and they said, you never became one of them. You're always one of us. And so I think what helped me get through the event on April 20th is the relationships that I had developed for the 20 years I had been there.
Right.
And it was fantastic. And, people ask me now, and I've been retired, it'll be 9 years this June. I miss the kids. I never had a bad day with the kids. And I would go out, I would block time out every day to go into classrooms. I'd be in the cafeteria, and people were amazed that I knew most of the kids' names. And while you're walking down the hall, all of a sudden you said, hey, Mary, and she's saying, oh my gosh, he knows my name, and that type of thing. It's all about relationships.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah. And to that point, being so well immersed with the school, obviously, you knew everyone involved. And so that was one thing I was, thinking about too, and preparing for this is, how can you, first of all, did y'all, as a suburban school system, and as we just said, if you would have asked you never would have thought that could have happened. But did y'all have anything that was already in place, like any kind of, because honestly, I don't think any schools really did, unless it was, schools in certain areas that maybe have had problems in the past. But, those are really the only ones that had any kind of, but
we had nothing. When I go out and share my story, I take people back to 1999, and the only drills we did were fire drills, and that was it. And now you look at all these drills that from the time kids are in kindergarten or even preschool and even nurseries, preschool, they're doing all these drills, lockdown, secure the perimeter and things of that nature. And there wasn't any roadmap. And I think you pointed out very nicely at the beginning that many of the things we're doing now are as a result of what lessons learned from Columbine, from the police, how they're responding. And it's frustrating at times when you see some of the events that are happening now. And unfortunately, it seems like we're making some of the same mistakes. And that's kind of heartbreaking to me at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you would think, that obviously, and unfortunately, you do have a lot to look at, because it hasn't been an isolated incident. There's been incidents, since, and then there's always, some breakdown of security. But at that time, there really wasn't security because that wasn't even in anybody's head that was going to happen. So.
But see, here's the thing that's a little bit different. We did have a school resource officer.
Okay.
And what happened back then, and this is how things have changed. We had a school resource officer who was exchanging gunfire with the two gunmen. And he was told that, now this was a protocol at the time, 1999. He could not go into the building until the SWAT team arrived, the special units arrived. And so the most frustrating thing for the people that day is there were probably 500 officers responding, and they kept telling the people, help's on the way, and they're looking outside, but they're not coming in. And SWAT probably arrived about 15 minutes after the first shots were fired. And it was not, I am a strong proponent for the police, and I testified on their behalf, but that was a protocol. Now you're looking, most recently, what happened up in Nashville. There was an officer within, I think, 10 minutes on there that's going to stop the threat, because most of these events are over, within 5 to 10 minutes. So you got to stop that perpetrator that comes on campus.
Right. But, and that's another thing. It's like, no matter how many security measures you put in place. I mean, if you have somebody who is mentally unstable and they are intent upon harming other people, you know, be it children, be it anybody really. I mean, how do you stop that? You know, it's like, yeah, that's kind of the scary thing, I think, for everybody right now.
Well, and I think, you know, speaking on behalf of Sandy Hook,
Mm-hmm.
there were lessons learned, and they had locked doorways and you had to buzz in. And this was the first time a gun person or a perpetrator shot through the glass. So
Right.
after Sandy Hook, they started putting on this film. But now you look at what happened recently in Nashville.
Yep.
They had a weapon strong enough to penetrate that film. So I was at a conference yesterday, and they're talking about now they're developing a film in which the police officers or security can fire out, but gunshots can't come in. So one step ahead. And it's really, I think what happens, and boy, you really hit it on the head with this. I think these perpetrators are trying to be one step ahead. And so you go to a lot of schools, for example, you go to Columbine between, you know, right after first period until the end of the day, you have two entrances, you have security. But when school students arrive and you're having 1,700 kids arrive and doors are open and all these kids. So I think a lot of these people that are planning it, you see a lot of these school shootings that are happening when school's beginning or when kids are coming on campus or after campus or during lunch when there's less secure area. And so I think a lot of these people, and I think what we got to look at is so many times we are publishing everything we're doing, you know, security wise, but at the same time, the perpetrators are looking, saying, well, I know they have this in place, they have this in place. And so it's really almost a catch-22. You share information, but are we giving information to the potential shooters?
True. Very true.
Well, to that thought, what were some of the changes that you made at Columbine, and you know, in reaction to the lessons you learned that day?
Right. We had security cameras, and that was one of the things. Parents were really concerned about having their kids come back to Columbine, and I said Columbine was probably the safest school in the world, and we had cameras everywhere, and they could monitor people coming in. We went to two entrances, and those doors were monitored. We had now this did not go on forever, but we had parent volunteers at every doors and things of that nature. And so we did that. And then later on, we would actually have where people would have to buzz in to come into the main office. They couldn't just walk into the school. And then there would be programs out there that you can check IDs to make sure that the person coming in, there's no reason for him or her not to be able to come in. But an interesting thing that I learned early on is I had a student come in to me, a couple of students. They said, Mr. D, we know you love us. We know you want to protect us, but we're more anxious now than what we were because of all this additional security, because we see armed officers, we see all these doors locked down. And that's the key point when I do reach out to these other communities. You want to make sure your school is safe, but at the same time, make sure it's conducive for learning, because it can create a lot of anxiety. And I remember people saying, well, we're going to put lock gates that people need to check in and they drive in, and we're going to put a security garage there. And I said, no. And I think that a lot of times, and I remember talking to the police because many times we had police cars parked in front, and that I remember parents driving by and saying, oh my gosh, there's something going on at Columbine. Right. So it's that fine line, and you need to get input from everyone, but you know, we need to keep the schools safe. And I think something that's important that we underestimate, and we didn't have this a whole lot when Columbine happened, was social media. Right. I think the only thing we had was MySpace back then. But now what happens a lot of times with these people that are doing it, they're broadcasting it prior. So we need to make sure that we tell our kids, we tell our parents, if they see something posted on social media, they need to report it. And so many of these states have like, for example, in Colorado, we have Safe to Tell, which is a 24/7 anonymous tip line. And so, you know, we're in all this together. When people ask me, what are you going to do? I said, what are we going to do?
Yeah. Yeah. Because, and that's another thing. It seems like that the more recent incidences on campus have been not necessarily from the students within the schools, but they're from outside threats. And like you said, I mean, they're coming up and they're just shooting through the glass, or kind of bypassing the secure measures that have been put in place to prevent something. So yeah, that's just all kind of crazy.
And I was talking yesterday to someone, and someone was asking me about metal detectors, and I said, well, if you look at it, logistically, you got to look at something. Now, I'm going to talk about, for example, Columbine High School, where we have 1,700 students. Getting everyone through a metal detector is difficult, but at the same time, if the three of us are planning something and we're intent on hurting someone, well, I basically say, Jennifer, we're going to go here. You're going to open this door for me, unless if you have someone monitoring it at 12 o'clock, you're going to let me in right here. How do you stop that?
Yeah, exactly.
So there's ways. It's just more, and I think that's probably the thing that puts the most fear in all of us, for our kids and our grandkids and things, is there's not one set thing that can stop these. And I think everyone's looking for that so-called solution. I'm not sure it's out there. You got to look at all that. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you do. So, well, now my big question, I was, thinking about, things to ask you, and the fact that you were at Columbine for so long beforehand. You said you were there about 20 years, and as a teacher, and then you became an administrator. And so you were there for about 3 years when this happened, and then you stayed with the school after that. What made you stay? Because I think for a lot of people, it would be like, all right, I can't handle this. And, just with everything that happened. And I think that takes a lot of strength to kind of take that helm and to help them get through that. So how did you do that?
Well, and this isn't for everyone, but I'm a person of faith. And I'll tell you, after Columbine happened, I could not go back to my house that night because the FBI was concerned about the safety and welfare of my family. Wow. And so they felt my family wasn't safe. So I'm sitting at my brother's house and sister-in-law's house. And for the first time in my life, I was questioning my faith. What I witnessed that day, as far as a bunch of stuff. And I said, God, how could you allow this to happen? These poor innocent kids, myself. And it was 2 days later, and I'm Catholic, and the priest called me, and I had been a member of the parish, St. Francis Cabrini, and Father Ken Leone called me down. He said, Frank, you need to come down. I said, Father, I'm struggling. I don't know where I'm headed right now. He said, please come down. So I walked into the sacristy, and there was about 1,200 people in the church at that time. And he called me up on the altar, and he said, if any of Mr. D's students are in church, please come up. And there were some of my students there and some staff. And I got up on the altar, and he whispered, and he prayed, and he whispered, he said, Frank, you should have died that day. But God's got a plan. And he quoted Proverbs 16:9. He said, in his heart, a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. And he said, it's going to be a tough journey. We don't know why you were chosen, and you're going to fall. And when you do, he's going to pick you up and carry you. And what we need for you to do is you need to go lead that community. And much more than that, you need to help others. So that's why, 24 years later, I reached out to Nashville and all these places. And so originally I made a promise that I was going to stay for 3 years. And then I still had about 10 years. I wanted to stay until the freshmen graduated, which was a class of 2002. But I was walking my dog, and we're getting ready for the 2001-2000 school year. And I said, I haven't rebuilt this community. We need to continue it. And so then I made a promise to stay until every kid who was in the elementary school graduated. Wow. And because even though they weren't part of it, they were involved in that community. So I'm getting ready to retire in 2012 and get a phone call, and parents said, we need to meet. And I said, oh, now what? So they come in and they said, Mr. D, you can't retire. And I said, no. I said that. They said, no, my kid was in the first year of a 2-year preschool program, so you got to stay a couple more years. So I made it 15 years. So when I retired, I was a principal for all the kids, and even kids that weren't born yet. And I was amazed when some of those kids that were, in first grade, second grade, they came up to Columbine and said, Mr. D, God, we were in second grade, and we remember all the helicopters. We remember the police. We remember the park. And so I felt that when I retired in 2014, I fulfilled what, the priest asked me to do. And then I really I really felt it was important. People say Columbine needed me. I needed Columbine, because if I would have left a year or two after, I would have always wondered how my staff and kids were doing. But at the same time, I'm heading up something we can talk about a little bit later, this Principal Recovery Network. And but one of the things, it's tough at times, because I do have principals coming up to me and saying, Frank, I don't think I can go back in that building. I'm struggling. And I said, don't use me as a model. You got to do what you feel is right for you. And I also need to state that politically, if Columbine happened today, I'm not sure if I could have kept my position wanting to stay there, because I had a school board president, John DeStefano, and I went in the next day and I said, I'm going to resign. Those kids died on my watch. Mr. Sandry said, you're not going anywhere. You stayed yet. You were here yesterday. You're going to be here today as long as you want. Well, now politically, there are principals that want to stay, but they're no longer there. You look at Uvalde. You look at the principal, a good friend of mine, Ty Thompson. He wanted to stay, but they said, you got an option. You're either going to go up to the administration area, or you're not going to be up in the district. So I was fortunate that I had the support of the district that allowed me to fulfill that promise of staying until the community is somewhat healed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, let's see. Hold on. I'm
One
looking
of the
at
things you did to rebuild the school after it took place, because We Are Columbine, was that something that predated?
Yeah, it goes back to my coaching days. We were playing a big arch rival, and so one of my assistant coaches, Ivory Moore, came up to me, and we're getting ready to try to get the team psyched to play this big game. And he said, I want to do something. Let me know what you think. So he goes in, and I'm there, and he said, we are, and I start yelling Columbine. So, and then he'd do it, and then all of a sudden we got all the kids doing it, and we just got fired up. The kids got fired up, and we used it a couple of times. So then once I became principal, I kept thinking back. I said, Mr. Moore, remember when we did that We Are Columbine? This had to be 1988, 1989, somewhere in there. I said my first assembly was the fall assembly. It was our homecoming assembly, and I introduced it to Columbine in 1996, October. And we did it, and it was a tradition we started. So every assembly, when I finished talking, we would do We Are, and the kids would yell Columbine. And that became, and so then when Columbine happened, it really became part of it, and it really helped us heal. And so we did that. And I think the important thing that allowed me is the relationships I had for 20 years. And I had parents that supported me, kids that supported me, and staff that supported me, excuse me. And I had someone, my mentor, Ron Mitchell, state, I did an interview for 3 hours before you. And so,
Oh, no.
But anyway, he said, in order to be successful as a principal, you have three groups. You have your students, you have your staff, and you have your teachers. And he said, the success of your career is going to be based upon the relationships that you have with those groups. And he said, if you don't have the support of all three, your career is going to be short-lived. And if you have, maybe just the students, but not the parents and staff. But he said, each time you have one of those groups that's supporting you, it's going to determine your career. And he said, if you're ever fortunate to have all three groups, then you're going to have a good career. And I really felt that I did have the support of those three groups that allowed me to stay on as long as I did. And so, and to me, the most important thing, it's all about relationships and with the kids. And, people have a hard time believing this, but in high school, for kids to walk down the hall, hey, Mr. D, we love you, and right back from that, and it can happen. And we were a strong community before, and we just built upon that strength, and it just helped us carry it forward.
Yeah, that's great. So, well, now we've talked about the different ways, like the physical ways that you can help protect schools with the cameras, with the, buzzing in and the perimeters and the locked doors. But what are some of the maybe intangible things that the other, like maybe administrators aren't necessarily thinking of because they're so focused on, well, we got to have, this checklist here. And, I'm thinking like mental health and the bully, all of that stuff that just plays right into it. So.
Right. Mental health is important. When I hear that school districts are looking to remove counselors or social. That bothers me a lot. It's all about relationships. I used to tell teachers they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
So
And that's
true.
important. And I look at it as a principal. And I say this when I go out and present, I can tell within 5 minutes how much teachers care, because all I have to do is walk in a classroom, and it's about those relationships, and those kids want to be in those classes and things of that nature. So don't underestimate that. The other thing that I learned, and it was life-changing, and I share this. I'll share this story with you.
Okay.
And this really changed the culture at Columbine. It was after it happened. I think a lot of times as principals, you find people that tell you what you want to hear.
Yep.
And that does not give you really a good vision of your school. So I could walk down the halls of Columbine and they would say, yes, we're blue and silver, Mr. D. We're rebels. We're Columbine. We're family. But when I became a better principal is when I walked outside the doors and there were kids over at the smoking pit, smoking cigarette cutting classes, or they were up at the mall, at food court, or they were at the skate park. And I'd go, what are you doing? They said, do you even know who we are? And I knew their name. And they would say, well, you say you care about us, but there's kids that could care less if we ever walk through those doors again. So I ended up telling them, you need to come, bring all your friends that feel the same way that you do, and we're going to meet. It was just me and about 100 students. And boy, did they lay into me. Not what I wanted to hear, but what I needed to hear. And I said, I'm fair game. And it was pretty intense. And I said, you need to come to our next assembly. And they said, why would we come to one of your assemblies that all you do is you recognize the top students, the athlete, you recognize the kids that are in the band. What about me? I got body tats and body piercings. Where do I fit in? I said, please come to the next assembly. Can I pause for just a second? I'm going to get
Sure.
throat. So I came up with this idea, and I gave every kid who walked in, and staff member and parents that were there, it's a link that says, we are Columbine. So all of a sudden it's my turn to present. And I said, everyone take out their link. And I said, the thing that makes Columbine so important is we are 2,000 strong, 2,000 individuals. And I said that each of you contribute to what we are at Columbine. Some people excel in the classroom, others on the court. Everything you have to offer makes Columbine special.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, moving forward, what's going to help us is, can you imagine when you take 400 or 500 individuals and put them together? Now we call this the class of 2017. So you have 500 individuals that are coming together. But just think what we could become from this day forward if we add 500 links from the class of 17, put them with 16, 15, 14, and we come together. And I said, here's what we're going to do. I had no idea if this was going to work or not. I said, I'm going to put on the song, We Are Family. And I said, by the end of this song, we're going to find a way to come together. The song is going, we see those kids that never came to an assembly were there, and they're next to the kids that are in their letter jackets for athletics, the whole thing. All of a sudden, we have 2,000 people in the gym, 2 sets of bleachers, and they're linked up and they're chanting, we are Columbine. So I told the students, I said, here's what we're going to do. This is going to change our school culture moving forward. And I said, Monday morning or early next week, we're going to put that chain up in the hallway. And whenever you're struggling, that you may be fighting with the boyfriend, girlfriend, parent, failed a test, remember, you're always connected to someone at Columbine. And so then what I would do is each year the seniors graduated, I would give them a link saying, even though you're graduating, you're always going to be connected. And I had an experience last year, and a lot of times you do things and you wonder if you have an impact. And I want to share 2 quick stories with you. One, I was in Ohio last year doing a presentation, and I talked about this link thing. And a person comes up and says, I love that story. And she said, I got to tell you something, how important those links were. And I said, what do you mean? And she started crying. She said, I'm I'm a friend of one of the parents of one of your kids. And I don't know how to tell you this, but he was killed in a car accident. But when they returned the belongings, he had that link in his pocket.
Wow.
And so here's the kid who had graduated. And if you get a chance, there's a video I did my last assembly, and it's called We Are Columbine, or just look at Frank DeAngelis' last assembly. And this link, and if you can't get it, I can share it through Dropbox, but there was a kid, Kevin Yagavani, and he was a kid, he didn't go through all the elementary schools or the elementary schools in the Columbine area middle school. But one of the things I would do when kids came in that weren't part of the school system in our area, I would call them in and sit down and meet with them. Within 5 minutes, I'm crying because he said I was his 9th principal. Every time someone told him they loved him, they got rid of him. He said, my mom and dad said, I love you, and they give me to my grandparents. My grandparents said, we don't want you. And he said, you're my 9th principal, but something's different in this school. You called me in here, you know my name. And he said, I never got my link, but I'll always feel connected to you. So all of a sudden, I'm getting ready for my last assembly, and I decided, I came in on a zip line, and I'm scared to death of heights. And so you'd have to see this video. And so the kids are going crazy. Well, I knew what I was going to do. It was my last assembly, but all of a sudden, I'm getting ready to go out. This Kevin Yagavani sent me a letter in my mailbox right when I was walking out. And he told me, and I said, I know now what I'm going to say. And he told me how Columbine has changed his life. So I called him down and gave him a link. There was probably 2,000 people maybe at the assembly, and they're all standing up cheering him. Kids are crying, and he's doing this with the link. And he came into my office crying. He said, this is the first time in my life I felt loved. And it was just phenomenal. You'd have to see this video, and it's just phenomenal. And so when I retired, I felt that I had changed that culture and environment. And part of that video, I did an assembly, but then about 3 weeks later was my last day. And I was keeping my composure. It was tough, 35 years there. And a young man comes up to me, and here's a big burly kid. He came up every day. Hey, Mr. D, how you doing? Give me a bear hug, and you doing all right? Yeah, things are great. Well, I'm getting ready. He comes up to me and he shakes my hand. He said, thanks for being more of a father to me than my dad ever was. And so that's the importance of relationships. And I felt that when I left that we were there where every kid mattered. And that was the important thing. And I think that's the thing that a lot of these kids that are, the ones that are carrying out these acts of violence, a lot of times are unhappy. You look at what happened just recently at Nashville. It's a former student that was upset.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, let's see. Yeah, because at Columbine, obviously you knew the kids involved. And I believe I had read that you actually saw them in the hallway. Is that right? And so.
Well, the thing that happened, and it still haunts me.
I know.
Our junior senior prom was on the Saturday before. So whatever that date would have been, the 7th, 18th, the 17th.
Okay.
Dylan Klebold is with his friends in a limo. He's with his girlfriend. He's high-fiving me, Mr. D, how you dancing, knowing in his mind in 4 days, he's going to blow up the school, killing a lot of people there. And I think the narrative out there is these two were these these kids were honor students. They had everybody fooled. And I refer to them, and a lot of people don't get this, I refer to them as the Eddie Haskell of Columbine High School, because they were the type, they'd be talking here, oh, you're right. They had people fooled. Mm-hmm. And I can remember teachers coming into my office in years following in tears saying, we never saw that side of them. It's kind of like when a situation happens and they interview a neighbor saying, boy, we never saw that side.
Never saw that coming. Yep.
And so they did a good job of hiding it. But these kids, they knew me. It was tough.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things that haunts me is, and we touched upon this a little bit with the mental health. I saw pictures of these two when they were, second, third grade with missing teeth, smiling in their soccer uniform. Then I saw the one coming after me pointing a gun, and I'm thinking, did we mess up? Did we let him down? I mean, did we miss something? And so, always wonder that. But sometimes you also realize there's just pure evil. And, especially the one, Harris was really a psychopath. That they produced these basement tapes, and they made them a year in advance, and they talked about everything they were going to do. And that was one of the most difficult things I had to do during this whole process. I had to spend about 3.5 hours watching these videotapes. And if those bombs would have went off, there would have been 600 or 700 people that died. So,
yeah, and like we were saying, I mean, how do you prevent something like that? I mean, it's nearly impossible to prevent anything, or everything from happening. So, but let's see.
Well, how can teachers like prioritize safety and security for for themselves and their students in this day and age with everything we've learned?
I know, and I think some of it's the drills and things of that nature. And one of the things in the state of Colorado, we have state legislation that we have to do 2 mandatory drills in addition to the fire drills. But one has to be some type of lockdown situation, and the other is some type of evacuation. And so one of the things we did, and I think people as parents and others are saying, gosh, by doing these drills, you're scaring, and it's not to scare, it's to prepare. And even, with elementary school saying, I can remember the first time I was at my granddaughter's kindergarten, they do some type of thing, get back into school. It was a drill. And they're all saying, Papa, Papa. And I said, well, they're just training us if for some reason there's a dog that gets off the leash. I mean, I'm not going to say, if there's a shooter, it's how you deliver the message. And so I think it's training teachers on what to do, simple things by locking the door, and that's the one thing people ask me, what do you think is one of the one things that could happen? And originally at Columbine, the teachers would actually have to go around the outside to lock their door. Mm-hmm. And I tell teachers, make sure your door is locked. Well, they're high school people, and they're saying, well, kids are late to class, so every time we have to open the door, it disrupts the class. Or if a kid goes to the restroom, so unfortunately the door would be unlocked. Okay. Well, that day when the shooting was happening, teachers were afraid to go in the hallway to put their key in the door. But what they have found, and I think there's only been one situation, and I think I'm correct in saying this, I think it was up at Red Lakes, where someone actually entered a door that was locked. But in most cases, what these shooters realize is it's going to be over pretty quickly. And if a door is locked, they're going to go to the safe time and move on. So now at Columbine, one of the things we were able to do is install software or locks that they could all lock from the inside. And so it's little things like that are beneficial. Something just training teachers, you look at a school like Columbine, and even though we have 2 entrances, there's a bunch of doors. Just telling teachers, in between passing periods, make sure those doors are pulled shut and things like that.
Yeah. So, I just had something. When I was out in Colorado last week or week before, and I saw there was a news item that came up on one of the local stations, and it was talking about how the school resource officers within the city of Denver public schools, like they had removed them, I think in 2020, but now there's the push to bring them back. And so I mean, I know it's a different system, but it's in the same area. So I was just going to ask you, what you thought about all that.
Well, what a great question, because tomorrow I'm going to that school with the school resource officer to bring them back. And I'm a strong proponent. Basically, what happened, a little bit of history, it was after the George Floyd incident. Mm-hmm. And some of the school board members felt that the police were discriminating against minority students. And so they pulled out, police were racist type things. And they pulled out all of the school resource officers. Yep. And I do a lot of work around with principals, not only in Colorado, but around the country. And I had principals saying, Frank, we need these school resource officers in, but they refused. And I was very vocal recently when this happened at Denver East High School, because whenever my phone starts during my thoughts and prayers thinking of you, and then the media calls. I know there's another school shooting. Yeah. And I went on, and I truly believe this. I think, and I really get on school administrators. It's how you promote the school resource officers. And not every police officer, and I'll admit this, not every police officer is meant to be a school resource officer.
Very true.
You know, and so they have to go through training. But I've had administrators saying, boy, if you mess up, I'm sending you down to the cop. And that's the wrong message. Our school resource officers worked together with the kids. They were at dances, they were teaching classes. Well, I truly believe that this student at Denver East, he had a safety plan that every day school administrators had to check his backpack. And so this kid knew that. Well, on this particular, and what I said is I truly believe, and a police officer was not going to pat him down, but if he was in there, an armed officer, that kid, in my humble opinion, would not have brought, if he knew a police officer was going to, he would not have brought the gun on. And basically what happened, he knew they were going to search the backpack, he hid the gun, and all of a sudden he got a little worried because he wasn't feeling comfortable the way the two administrators were working, and that's when he pulled the gun. Well, if he knew that that officer was there, that I don't think he would have done it.
Right.
I don't think, and he'd still be alive today.
And be a deterrent. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I'm a strong proponent for police officers. And it's not, but I just see, we had an officer a couple of years ago, Gordon Beasley, and he was, it was the summer, and he was working, and unfortunately he was in an incident where he was killed in Old Town, Arvada. And I went to his service, and there must have been thousands of kids there talking about what a great person he was. And he used to ride the bike to school with special needs students. And that's the school resource officers we need. They're that one adult. But unfortunately, I think what was a wake-up call is what happened at Covenant, the school there, is I think a lot of parents are moving their kids to parochial or Christian schools, and you never expect it to happen. Now you're seeing it's happening there, and we're all vulnerable.
Yeah.
And, I'm working right now, the church I go to, and we have some clergy that feel it's never going to happen in a church. And I said, well, we still need to be prepared because it has.
You do. It has happened. Yeah. And I mean, it goes back to relationships, just like you were saying. I mean, it's relationships that the SROs have with the students and with the faculty. I mean, that's, to me, that one word encompasses really, your best defense, I guess, how you can handle that. But anyway.
So I'm a little anxious tomorrow to go back, and I'm going to meet, I think, with the SRO, and then introduce him to some students that are going to be there. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to meet with their faculty after. So I'm a little anxious, a little nervous, but I'll do my best.
Yeah. Well, now, I understand that Columbine, and I think, Sara, you were telling me about this, but they have every year, they'll have, I think it's called Columbine Serves. Is that what you had said? That they have like a serve day. Right. And so did you start that?
No, I did not.
Okay.
And one of the things that we did is we did not have school on the 20th.
Okay.
And part of it was to memorialize, but also we would always get a lot of threats around that time of year. And just for whatever reason, and I still have a hard time believing it's 24 years in Columbine. Whenever another shooting happens, the name Columbine comes up. And so we did a lot of that, but it was actually the principal after me. His name was Casey Summers, who started the day of service. So it started, I retired in 2014, so 15, and I think this is the 8th year or 7th year. And basically what we do on that day is all our kids, and we have alumni, we have parent and community members, and we do days of service. And last year we had 1,100 different days, and they go out and they help within the community, and it really is fantastic. And so one of the things that we end up doing is I was just at a meeting the other day for it, and I think at this point we're well over 1,000 people. Projects are going to take place on that day. And then what I do is every year I go into the library, and the library that was there that day is no longer there. So we have the Hope Columbine Memorial Library, Hope meaning the healing of people everywhere. and I invite the families back, and I read the names, and we just do a moment of silence and things like that. But that we also include that day of service. So it's fantastic. And it was a couple of years ago on the 20-year remembrance, 2019. So it'll be 3 years that Governor Polis dedicated April 20th as a day of service, a proclamation day. So and now one of the things our superintendent is doing, Tracy Dorland, is she sent out a letter promoting it with all the schools within Jefferson County to do a day of service.
Very
So
cool.
it's a pretty good idea.
Well, let me ask you this. If you were to give the schools a grade, what grade would you give them in terms of preparedness, generally speaking? I know it's regional and differs, but overall, what would
I
you?
have to say Jefferson County, and the reason I say this, I still do some consulting and work with the Jeffco Security, and I know everything that they're doing. And part of it is we've had some situations, not only Columbine, but there was a shooting at Deer Creek Middle School and some other situations, and they take security pretty seriously. And one of the things I think is important is our school district decided to have a separate budget for security, because a lot of times if you're out there saying you have let's hypothetically have $100,000 and we got to divide that up between, instruction and security, they're saying, well, we really need the instruction piece. Right. But what we have is there's a budget that's designated. So we have, in addition, the schools do not pay for the school resource officers. We have a working relationship with all the different agencies. Mm-hmm. But what we do have is campus supervisors that are they're not carrying weapons, but they're trained, and that's another resource for kids. And then we do have security that Jeffco provides. So we take it pretty seriously. We go through drills, and a lot of times when they go through drills, like what we would do is we would have the district security there, or we would have the police officers there just maintaining, saying, and that we would go around to each classroom and say, do you realize where you were, that if there was an intruder that you were more vulnerable or things? And, and one of the things we try to do, is what happens if an event happens during a passing period? Mm-hmm. And you got to look at, or like when Columbine, it happened during lunch and we had kids that were entering and going off campus. So we take it pretty seriously. Now, part of that, I think in Columbine, because Columbine's in Jefferson County, it hits home a little, more closely. Sure. But I think I can't speak for all school districts, but I think they're all doing it. And then, unfortunately, when these events happen, like Denver East, or you look at Nashville, and all the shootings that have occurred, mm-hmm. people, I think they look at their safety plans more so. I think what happens is parents are saying, the first questions, they're coming back and saying, what are you doing as a school? Is our
what
school
about us? Yeah.
Yeah. What about us? Type of thing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So, yeah, because we actually just got on Monday, because we were on spring break last week, but got a email from our superintendent here, and it was talking about how they were looking at, reviewing the safety plan and making sure that they, in more in response, because we're about 2 hours away from Nashville, where I live. So yeah, so I do think that it's almost, sadly, that they that tends to be the time that they turn around and try and take a look at things. But
and that's what scares me, because it's a whole society thing, and all of a sudden now we're talking about it. And I know today in Colorado, I just saw that about 10 students walked out over gun issues and things of that nature. But what scares me is all of a sudden, this is a relevant topic, but 5 months from now, and hopefully there's not another, but you've got to continually stress the importance of this, because I think when you let your guard down, then that's when you're most acceptable. Yes.
Yeah, sadly. But yeah, I mean, like just propping open the door. Well, it's hot. Let's let some air in, or, it's a nice day. We'll just, And, but that's, you just never know. And,
I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, odds are nothing's going to happen, but you just never know.
Well, it's something else that's important, especially for high schools and middle schools in your after school programs, because what ends up happening during the day, you walk into most schools and you have security, you have teachers, but a lot of times high schools like Columbine High School is open from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. And so after school programs, you have kids that are in the play production, you have kids that are meeting, and all of a sudden a teacher or a sponsor props the door open to let the kids come in. That's very susceptible. And then all of a sudden you have, your custodians that are working and they're unaware of people in the building. And, and one of the things that I really recommended, and we do in Jefferson County, and a lot of them, we have DEFCO security guards that are in all these high schools that are monitoring the one entrance into the building, just because we saw it before that people had full access to the building, and we caught on camera and saying, we got to be careful from 5 o'clock until, the school closes.
Well, yeah, because you just never know. I mean, even at our high school, you'll have a basketball game. So you have all kinds of people coming in the building, and there's police officers there at the games, but nobody checking people or anything like that coming in.
Yeah. So. And if you're at a basketball game and you have to do some type of lockdown or something situation outside, who's in charge? Yeah. All of a sudden you have visiting teams there and you're telling them you can't leave, you're locked down, this type of things going in. So it's going through that whole training, whether it be with administrators. Right. And I think a lot of times, if it's a game, you're going to have administrators there. But what happens on nights in which there's, the administrators leave to go home and all you have is just play practice or, a meeting, who's in charge then? Is it going to be the custodian? Is it going to be the security, and that type of thing? So these are all things. It's unfortunate you have to think like that, but boy, not to be prepared can really create some issues, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's see, Sarah, did you have anything else? Did I miss anything, or I kind of was jumping around, I know. So sorry about that.
Well, kind of to that, what you were talking about, how there'll be a gap, potentially between large events. So in the interim, how do we continue to keep that conversation, at the forefront for educators and, and the other non-gun related threats to students, such as student on student, custodial battles that come onto the school. How do we continue to keep the safety and the security for the students, even in those gap times?
It's constant communication, and you can't over communicate because, and one of the things that I did as principal, a lot of times what ends up happening is you put students, for example, Columbine, 1,700 students in a gymnasium, and you have this conversation about safety. And who knows who's paying attention? So one of the things I felt it was so important that I would take all of our administrators, there was myself plus 5 administrators, and we would go meet with their students in the English classes because every kid had an English class. So now you have a set of 30 kids. You're making eye contact to make sure they're listening, because if that message is strong enough, and we would bring our school resource officers over and parents over, but you need to keep reiterating it and not wait until something happens. And I think communicate and just being able to share that information, because, and the other thing you have is, with new staff members and new things coming in, it's that communication piece, which is so important.
Yeah.
And it seems like now there's stuff that, gosh, I was just somewhere, somebody was saying, gosh, I was just at a conference and someone was talking about the biggest concern educators had back in 1955 were kids chewing gum in class. When you look to where we are now, the situation of guns, pipe bombs. And the other thing that's happening right now is talking to someone, and I can't remember I was in Tampa Bay, and they're saying all of the kids that are bringing drugs in, onto campus and things of this nature. Yep. And the thing that I tried to do, and I think it's so important, is it's not just the principal, it's just not the teacher. We're all responsible for each other. We're Columbine students, we need to take care of each other. And, towards the end of my career, and I think I stated this, we have a program called Safe and Sound Schools, but I can't tell you the number of anonymous text I got from people saying, I'm worried about my friend. They posted something on Facebook, the world would be better without me. And we would go over these things. If you get these texts, make sure you report it, because if you wait and say, well, I don't know if they're serious, and they hurt themselves, think about living with that for the rest of your life. And so I think it's having those conversations with kids and staff, and assuming that it takes place and making sure it gets done.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think so many times people think of school safety and they instantly go to like an active shooter or, something, but it's not that's a very small minority of what, actual security issues there are in schools these days. I mean, that's, it's reported on a lot. You hear a lot about it, but I mean, like day to day, I mean, you talk about bullying, you talk about drugs, the whole thing with the internet and cyberbullying even, it's just, there's so many things coming at you from all angles. So,
Right. And I was shocked. I was at a conference and they were saying that after the pandemic, it really had an impact on the social, emotional being of students. And they were talking about the suicide ideations or suicide, and it was rising, the percentage was rising. So immediately my mind goes to high school, maybe middle school, but I couldn't believe the percentage of elementary kids, and I'm sure some of it, I don't know what age kids are getting phones, but I got to believe that some of the stuff that's going on there and texts that are coming in, and these kids, and one of the things, and I'm kind of sounding like get off my lawn type of guy, but I really struggle with some of these links that people get likes. And I just think of a poor kid who posts something on whatever, and they see some of the kids that end up getting 1,000 likes, and he or she doesn't get any, or there's rude comment. What does that do? I think back to the day that, you all of a sudden kids having a birthday party and you're one of those kids that didn't get invited. And I mean, it's that constant reminder. And so it's that whole social emotional being and taking care of the kids. And, that's what we have to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the scary thing. It really is. I have 2 in college right now, and I have a son who's in 4th grade. And so, yeah, big gap. But yeah, I remember my girls had phones, not necessarily for that, but yeah, I would tell them just turn it off, because it just would get, oh, well, they didn't invite me. Like you said, I mean, it used to be that you'd find out a couple days later that you weren't invited to the party. Well, now you see pictures, they're all at the skating rink or, or whatever. And it's just, yeah.
Well, and one of the things too, I used to tell, and I had a good enough relationship with the kids, and we'd be in this, and I'd tell these girls, you need to be careful what you post, and you're going to have some guy who says you're the love of my life, and you send some pictures that all of a sudden you break up and those pictures go viral. What does that do? And we've seen a lot of those students that feel that their lives are ruined once that goes viral, and they end up hurting themselves. And so, you have to, those are tough discussions, but you got to have them.
You do. So
Well,
it's just so
let
much
me,
coming at them. Oh.
Let me wrap it up with one last question. If you could give advice to educators, principals, people, that are in the administration, what would be that advice to them as they're, facing these different risks profiles, and they're on the ground and they're dealing with this? What would you suggest, or what would you recommend to them?
Not to give up hope. I think I'm worried where we're headed with education. I think we see what we're seeing in Colorado, and I'm sure this is a national trend, that there are people that are near retirement saying, this is not, I'm ready. And they're retiring early. And then what scares me is you have young teachers that are starting out saying, this is not what I signed up for. And we need to, one of the things that you got to build upon all the positive, and, we dwell on the negative, but to me, it's all about relationships, and that one adult and being involved in his principals. I used to drive my teachers crazy from the standpoint, they said, you're never in your office. And I said, if you need to talk to me, set up an appointment, because I wanted to be visible. And I think that's so important, in being involved, and that the kids feel comfortable talking to you. And, we can't give up hope. And I think a guy, his name is Dewey Cornell, and he does a lot. He's world renowned, but he said and this was really an eye opener for me. And he did a video and he said, think about it, school shootings. And this, I think this came out maybe in 2014 or 15. He said, and this number's probably increased. He said, think about every day there's over 300 shootings or homicides every day in America. How many of those happen in school? Very limited. But when they happen, they become, a big deal. When you look at it, if we were to look at how many people died on when it happened at Nashville, and then you look at overall how many people died, I mean, it's a small percentage. And not to underestimate that or diminish that, but schools are still a pretty safe place, but we still can't get complacent. And as a society, I never want to get to a point that it happens. We say, okay, how many this time? This, we can't do it. And, and I said, they're all of our kids. It doesn't matter. Florida, Tennessee, wherever we're from, we got to come together and say enough's enough. And it's not only the adults, it's the students, and that's where I give the Parkland kids a lot of credit. When they came out and they said, you adults have let us down. We hear the same thing after every school. We heard it after Sandy Hook. We heard it after this, but the same thing is going on. Yeah. And we got to change it. And I met with that group, the vocal kids, and I said, the cameras are on you now, but sooner or later cameras are going to go away. Oh, that'll never happen. I said, trust me, they will. I said, if you really want to change in what you're speaking right now across the country, then you need to get your friends that are nearer the voting age, and they need to determine to get people in that are going to address, your philosophy and platforms like that. So I think that's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's the same thing with principals and people within the community, because what I see happening in Colorado is I've never seen school boards that are being so politically aligned. And I saw a lot of that. And depending Republican, they're taking on the philosophy of the Republican Party and Democrats, and it's really splitting communities. And I think that's happened a little bit in Denver. And so we got to look at it. And when I speak to administrators or I speak to legislators, I said, we got to cross the line when it comes to the safety of our kids, because they're all of our kids. And we can't let our platform or agenda determine that, because another life is one too many. So
yeah,
maybe I'm naive, but I don't know. I'm not going to give up hope.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm with you on that. So, well, that's awesome. Wow, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
I talk too much. I hope.
No, not at all.
I probably talk too much, so I apologize for that. But
if you get a chance to look up that video, I just got to see this kid.
I actually watched it yesterday. It was so powerful.
Oh man, this kid, it doesn't do just, but when they stood up and that kid is holding and he's pumping his fist and kids are crying, and he came into my office and Mr. D, I've never felt so loved. And that kid went on to be the editor of the school newspaper and went up to CSU. And so, it's just changing. Don't underestimate the power of a positive culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, well, okay.
If you need anything else, let me know.
We really appreciate it.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks again. Have a good one.
You also. Bye.